Hello, and welcome to a small version of our community office hours this week. I wanted to make sure that we allotted time. Ethan has been working on Go repository, adding that amongst other issues for adding into the package stage. And so I wanted to make sure that we had time to go through the epic, talk about what work is upcoming, and discuss any priorities or changes, as well as who can work on what and timing of things. So I wanted to share, let me post this epic here in the Zoom chat, and then we can leave it to, from what I've seen, I'll share my screen for a second. Okay, we've been working through this epic, and from the last I heard, Ethan, the issues right now, the Go repository is sitting behind a feature flag, and what Stan mentioned to me was the features that are blockers for that are the moving the archive generation to workhorse, fixing the SQL N+1 problem, and reducing the usage of Giddily.
Mm-hmm.
And then a second really nice to have would be having the Go modules into the UI and API.
So the SQL problem is specifically relating to that to the incorporating them into the API. The Go proxy doesn't use SQL at all. But yeah.
Okay, so I just changed. So this seems like the right order then, right? Workhorse, Giddily, then SQL and incorporate.
Yeah, the fix SQLs I created that issue mostly so that I could whitelist certain things so that I could actually test them. So that's really a prerequisite to that merge request getting to the MR for incorporating them into the API getting merged.
Cool, that makes sense. And then I saw recently you created a bunch of issues too, some of these like optimization or scheduling.
Yeah, so I'm working with David on the incorporating modules into the API, and he had concerns about the scope. So I created those issues as follow-up for things that I had implemented in the MR that I split off into separate branches.
I see.
So, yeah.
Okay. Okay. I just wanted to level set on that. Do you have any open questions that we could talk about now or comments?
So there's a couple of MRs that haven't got a whole lot of response. So there's one for I created a function specifically for Go it created a workhorse method. I'm not sure what those are called. Specifically for creating Go archives, because we were talking previously about filtering the zip that came back from the workhorse, or that came back from Giddily, but that is zips don't really work that way. You pretty much have to write the whole thing to disk. So I made a custom endpoint that asked Giddily for a tar and then filters the tar and constructs a zip on the fly, which constructing zips can be done without writing to disk. Reading them, not so much. So it's a little custom function. I tried to reuse as much code as possible from the existing workhorse create archive function, but I wasn't sure there was a better way, though Stan suggested actually making changes to Git to support filtering. And that is not something that had occurred to me. Where's this? And then there's, so one of the, there's this other MR, it's pretty small, it hasn't really had any activity. Without going into extensive details as to exactly how Go fetches things, if we add a single meta tag to one of the middlewares, that should mostly eliminate the need for configuration. So with that small addition, Go should automatically pull from the proxy without having the users do anything. So that's a nice feature.
Ethan, is that the one that was open like a few days ago? Like, I don't know if it's this one.
No.
No. Yeah, it looks like.
Yeah, so that one that I just opened a few days ago, that's
mm,
some work I was doing on the incorporate modules into the API
okay.
that I split off. Yeah, I sent a link to what I was talking about. Did I send the same link? I did send the same link.
Yeah. Right.
What? Okay. I missed the workhorse one.
Oh, no worries.
Copied and pasted the wrong tab. So those are the two I was talking about. And then separately, there is there's stuff worth discussing for follow-up, but maybe it's still too early for that. And also it's not personally high on my list of priorities because things like having GitLab implement a checksum database doesn't impact me personally, so it's not on my personal priority list. But they are, so what? Okay, right. The keyboard on my Mac, sometimes when I hold down the command button, doesn't work.
Never happens to me.
Yeah, so that last one, yeah, it's something that, that issue is not as much of an issue as a place to have a discussion, but that is long-term, those are things that should be discussed.
So the two MRs, 33563 and 34015, or no, the 514, those haven't been getting as much attention. Are there issues for those, or just the MRs? I think that could be why I lost sight of them.
Workhorse one, there is an issue for, and that's the move archive generation to the workhorse. Yeah, so that's the first one under the Epic. The second one, there's no corresponding issue for.
I think I could add an issue for that, just so we're tracking it in the Epic and everything. I'll do that right after this call.
Yeah, and I mean, I do have a lot of MRs open, so I understand there's a limited amount of bandwidth for reviewing.
I do have a question about the archive generation. I can see it in your MR about incorporating Go modules on package UI. You do generate a zip file for a package.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we move the archive generation to Workhorse, we would have two zip archive generations, or what is the plan around that?
I hadn't thought about that. That's a really good point.
Because I thought that the zip archive generation within the package model in Rails was a good idea. We just need to plug it when there is an action where we need to resync the Go modules with packages. But then once you have this kind of synchronization, you do have the zip file within packages. And so the Go proxy wouldn't need to generate them. He would just not inquire. He would just need to find the right package and read the zip file, and that's it. He can return that. And that was kind of a good approach, since it's all done in a worker, so we are not limited in time. And I wonder what made the decision to move everything to Workhorse, or, well, right now we have both ways open, but I guess in the end, only one of them will be surviving all of this.
There's kind of two separate pieces here. One is we want to see Go modules in the normal package UI. The other one is we want to support the Go proxy protocol, which Go is weird. The Go proxy protocol is kind of like the other package repositories in that it serves a similar purpose of distributing packages, but it's unlike it in that, npm you upload something, whereas Go, it's fetching from the repository. So they're coupled, but I wouldn't say they have a strong coupling, I guess, so to speak. And so the proxy endpoint at this point is just generating everything on the fly. It looks through, everything is generated as it scans it, via scanning, making Giddily calls and scanning the repository. So moving the archive generation to the workhorse came up when I was working on that MR. And the point is that the Go proxy says, the user makes a request, the Go proxy checks Giddily, says, oh yeah, that's a valid tag, that's a valid, it has a Go mod file, cool, we'll do it. And then the Rails application generates the archive. So that step, since that could take a while, especially if the project is very large, Stan was talking about moving to the workhorse. I like the idea of generating the archives in a background worker, sticking them in the database, and then serving those. I would like to retain the behavior that the Go proxy will respond to any query, regardless of whether or not it has already captured that as a valid captured that in the database. That, because that behavior, I think, is what Go expects and is more in line with how Google's proxy works, but that's not open source, so I don't actually know.
Yeah, I totally understand the performance concern of having the archive generation in line with a web request, which is not a great idea, I guess. But now that you're working on a refresh service or sync service that would create all the Go modules and store them in the package files, the Go proxy could have this behavior where the packages act like a cache, I guess. It would check the packages. Oh, I have this version. I can use the zip file which is associated. And if the version is not there, yeah, perhaps the refresh processing is ongoing, but I need the zip file right now. Perhaps for those cases, we could generate the file on the fly, but we would need to measure if there are, I guess, if there are many cache hits versus many cache misses, where the proxy would need to generate everything. But I guess I will bring up this question in the archive generation in workhorse and check for the others' opinions on that.
Okay.
What is sure is that we will not have two archive generations. That's not really good, I guess. We will need to just choose one, but I don't know which one is better. From what I'm saying, the Rails one seems to be simpler to implement, but perhaps there are some aspects that I don't grasp about the archive generation on workhorse. Because on workhorse, you need to implement some ping pongs between workhorse and the Rails app, so that workhorse receives a request from Rails saying, hey, I need an archive. So you would need to implement that in both projects. Whereas the archive generation in Rails, it's all within Rails, so it's more contained, I guess. But well, I will ask the question on the workhorse issue.
So the concern with putting it in, well, with having it in Rails, which is where it currently is that if the repository is a very large repository, then the archive generation will be fetching blobs for potentially every single file for a given ref, which, if it's large, could take a while. So that's the concern of having it in Rails, is that it takes a while, and I assume also that it might delay the request and eat up a worker for however long it takes. One thing that I don't know, so I would like to have package files. It would be nice to show the files that the Go proxy serves in the package interface. I wonder about putting those in the database, since they are all reconstructible from Git. So it's redundant, it's essentially redundant data. And I think it's valuable to have a cache. I wonder if that should be in the database. One thing that occurred to me is we could put stuff in Redis and have a cache, but then it would get thrown away, I assume, on reboot. So that's just something I've been mulling, that I'm not sure what the answer is.
I would rather have a way where this generation is done and stored in a persisting place. That could be the database, that could be workhorse, that could be Gitali, whatever. But Redis, yeah, you might encounter issues with rebooting and such, and so you would need to reconstruct everything. Mm-hmm. Because if you take a project code base where it doesn't move, you would generate the archive generation, all the archives once, and that's it. And we can implement something around generating archives for versions that don't have the package model, and everything else is just kept. I mentioned that I added a comment on the MR I'm reviewing about adding a package metadatum model where you could be storing where I suggested the commit char from the tag. You should store something where you can compare a Go module and a package and say, okay, this Go module is really this package, and since we have all the files below, we don't need to regenerate the archive. Because I thought about, since the Go proxy is all about Git tags, what happens if you remove a tag and then recreate it? Well, not reuse the tag name, but you point to a different Git history. You would have a different archive. So if we have this synchronization between Rails and between the package model in Rails and the Go modules, we need a mechanism to verify that they are still in sync. Mm-hmm. It's not just verifying that they exist. We need something more. Yeah. And for me, it was the commit char good one, but perhaps we can use something else. And this way, the worker can reason about, okay, this Go module has already been generated. I don't need to deal with it. I can just take the next one. This one has files, has the package models, but they are not coherent. They don't match. The SHA commit doesn't match. So I need to destroy the package and recreate it. But yeah. Well, that's all ideas for now. But I guess the starting point is throwing this question in the workhorse issue and see what's others' opinion on that.
I like what you said about the Go metadatum. What I was thinking is that users could delete the package, but I do like having it explicitly recorded better. Part of my thought process was Go really does not like when you move a tag. It makes all kinds of things, all kinds of upset, and it's really just it's really better not to do it. No matter, you can be running your own GitLab instance that you can go muck around with things, and it's not happy. So,
We can detect this tag renaming, and the worker will just send an email to the user that created the package. Hey, you're doing something wrong. Don't do this in Go.
yeah.
But that's a good point. Yeah, if we use the package models as a kind of intermediary cache, we shouldn't let users be able to delete them. That's not a good idea. But that's something we can do. Yeah, that's
Okay. So I was thinking about one of the reasons the proxy behind a feature flag is the Giddily changes, and there's one of those is one of the minor changes is fairly straightforward in that adding a filter. I'm trying to figure out where I put that issue. Adding a filter to one of the Giddily endpoints will reduce the amount of data that it has to return, because the Go proxy only cares about Go mod files, but you can't, that function does not support globs or anything that would let you ask for only Go mod files. So you have to ask for everything, and that's a whole lot of extra data. So that's a fairly minor change. There's another change that could potentially eliminate the need for n+1 queries. That one is a significantly more ambitious query, in that it would basically be like search files by name, but for a large set of tags. That's effectively the optimization that is needed. But I have a proof of concept. It can scan Giddily in 1 second. That's still a fairly long period of time. So that one I would, I would not mind having someone else take that over, because that's a pretty ambitious change to Giddily. But it would really improve the, should eliminate the n+1 queries.
I haven't thought about something else, but you will be mad at me, and Haley too, as Go developers. What about if for the first iteration, we just support Go mod files that are at the root of the project? And this way you don't need to search within all the directories for Go mod files. You would just check if there is one at the root of the project. And I asked this question on the Go channel of GitLab, and yeah, my question was if it is a common usage to have multiple Go mod files within the same code repository. And the answer was that it's not commonly used, but it is used. So if we go out without this feature, it would need to be implemented like on iteration number 2, 3, or 4, like really after the release of the first one. But I don't know if it's a balance. If we take this constraint, we can document it, of course, but then you wouldn't need to scan all the folders for Go mod files. You just check the one at the root, and that's it. Would that help with the performance issue?
So that would certainly reduce the number of queries, because you would only need a query for a specific subset. I think I would still want to, so Go's versioning is a little bit interesting. one of the ways to have a version 2 is to put a v2 folder in the repository. So I think it would be valuable to look for those, because that could, well, I mean, one of the things is the proxy works. You know, the proxy, it's behind a feature flag, but it works, and it doesn't have, when you query the proxy, you query for a specific path. So it does have to look through a set of tags, and that is an n+1 query, but it's not, you know, it's only looking at a specific path. It's not scanning, you know, the refresh worker is doing an ls file, you know, search files by name for the whole repository, and then treating any go mod file as the root of a module. But the proxy only looks at the path that the user enters. You know, so the request has a path, it only looks at that path, so it doesn't have the same problem exactly. So the proxy works, and you know, it's behind a feature flag, but it does everything it needs to do. So by only looking in the root, if we're talking about the MR that we're working on, that is going to change what is displayed in the UI. So it's not, you know, it would be nice to have everything displayed in the UI, but it's not going to be a big functional impact if users can't, you know, if it's limited. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I'm sorry I was not explicit, but I was effectively talking about the worker that needs to sync all the Go modules of one project with package models. It has to scan all the Git repository for Go mod files. And I was wondering if we could, for the first iteration, just scan for the root file.
Yeah, I think that would be fine, because that's just going to change, you know, what's displayed to the, well, that's going to change the list of packages, but won't change the repository or what can be fetched.
Yeah, I totally get that. But then we can open an issue about adding support for multiple Go mod files, and that could be that could go in line with the Gitali issues about updating the functions or adding new ones, so that we can query the whole repository in a more efficient way. That's also possible.
Yeah, I think we can do that.
You will also see in my comment in the MR we are working on, there is another constraint I suggested, and it was the API that receives the call to refresh the packages has an optional parameter, which is ref. And I wonder if we could just drop it for the first version and just implement everything, so that the API will just sync really all the Git repository or Go modules with all the package models, and that's it. You don't have the choice to choose a ref or whatever, but we could be adding that at a later time to a future iteration if we need that. But by having that, it simplifies a bit things, because finders will not need to have this ref support, and the whole thing would be just scanning for files and not so much about looking for files or looking for Go mod files in exact refs or exact commits. You will just need to scan everything.
So the Go proxy is still going to need to look in specific refs.
Yeah, that's for the finders. I saw that, but you just need, for the Go proxy, you need the name and the version, right? You don't need so much about the ref.
So the version name you're saying?
Yeah, which is the tag name, I suppose, since it's
Yeah. So that's an example of a fetch you could make, or of what you would type into get, go or into go get. So that the query, if you're depending on what you're trying to fetch, that becomes so that's the query. So there's the version name or version number, which is the tag name, and the path, the full path of the repository, and it could include a subpath. And then the extension is either info, mod, or zip, depending on, there's 3 different endpoints there. So the queries for those 3 endpoints take the path and the tag name, and have to verify that that reference is a valid Go module. But that comes down to a single fetch, or a single Giddily blob fetch to check if a Go mod file exists in that ref at that path. Though the zip endpoint, as it stands today, will then also go and fetch that entire subdirectory.
yeah. Yeah, okay.
Does that mean ref is needed as part of the query?
Some of the queries, yes. I think I have not entirely gotten a hold of or internalized the minimal iteration philosophy. So I do tend to think, what am I going to be wanting in the future? And so some of the stuff in the finders, I think I can simplify those and tear out some of the logic that isn't actually being used right now.
Yeah,
Yeah, I saw
I
some.
have the same conclusions where there are a lot of flexibility in the finders, but the current DMR will just use one, so we will use that to simplify the implementation. And yeah, but I guess it's all about the iteration philosophy, where you just go forward in small steps and you don't add things until you really need them.
Yeah, so the finder will need to use the tag name, but only in certain circumstances.
Yeah, that's correct. I think I saw a finder which was accepting a lot of different objects and classes. It can be a string, it can be a commit, it can be a git commit, and if those usages are not within the DMR, yeah, it's better to not have them, so that you simplify the code and it's shorter. And then you might never know what the future holds, right? So perhaps you will not need them, or you will come out with another idea. But that's the whole thing. You just implement what you need right now, and that's enough.
So Tim, do you want me to, or is it okay if I separate the reduce GoProx or the reduce Giddily usage into a number of different issues? Because right now it kind of covers a fairly broad set of changes.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. That'd be great.
I think we've talked about the main things that are important, that are high priority right now. Oh, there is the, yeah. So in the MR that David and I are working on, I don't think so. The SQL stuff, the SQL N+1, I think that's probably a straightforward fix, but my ORM experience is with .NET stuff, so with Entity Framework, and is not translating to writing effective queries in Rails. So I've tried to play with it, but I'm pretty sure, because I mean all the requirements are fairly straightforward, so I'm pretty sure it should be not that difficult to write effective queries that don't hit the database a ton of times, but I just don't have the tricks down.
I can have a look at that if you want, and try to find things. But yeah, I didn't look really in detail this second time because in my comment there are some architecture questions, I guess, and depending on the response, they will trigger a refactoring. So
Yeah.
I would rather wait for this refactoring and I guess a more stable code that is not moving a lot. So this way I can just check the queries and I can take care of that, or what? Not taking care of that, but having a look and suggesting what you could do.
Cool.
David, was there anything else that you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, I guess it's more general feedback is that when you see that the MR size is growing really, really fast, it's usually time to split it up. But it happens to everyone. even me, we did a lot of big size MRs where we needed to split them up. So yeah, that would be keeping an eye of the amount of changes, and if it goes above a reasonable limit, perhaps think about splitting things up or dropping features that could be dealt with at a later time. But I guess it's everything. It's all with the iteration concept and MVC. It's the same thing. You just do some baby steps, and yeah, you avoid the mammoth steps.
So do you have a kind of rough number that you normally target as staying under?
Yeah, for backend changes, things above 1,000 lines change, it's a good indicator that probably you can split it. But of course, there are some exceptions. We have GraphQL changes that generates a lot of not code, but documentation. So you have a lot of changes. But in general, on the backend, yeah, I work around the 1,000 line change. But it's not a strict limit, right? You just, it has to trigger, I guess, a thought about, oh, is this MR too big? Can I split it in smaller ones? Can I drop a feature or a parameter or a function or something so I can make it smaller? And it really helps for the review times because it's easier to digest and dig in and review. And the same goes for the maintainer review phase. It's easier to digest. So in the end, it's a bit more work of splitting everything, but you still have, I guess, more velocity because well, I have seen some pretty long discussions on mammoth MRs, and they are like without any end. So it's easier to reason about small MRs than bigger ones. Well, that's logical, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that would be a general feedback for all these MRs, keeping an eye on the growth of changes and perhaps sometimes just if it goes above the 1K code lines change, perhaps think about splitting it or dropping a feature or leaving something for future usage if you don't need it right now. Is that clear or?
Oh yeah, no, totally, it makes sense.
And just to piggyback on David, something I've observed is bugs hide in big MRs. They're hard to review. Like little finer points are a lot easier to miss. So I think the quality overall ends up being higher with smaller MRs.
Anything else we should talk about? That seemed really productive.
And there's a number of issues on that epic that are low down and thus not high priority. I guess one thing is, so when I'm talking about, there's a issue for supporting vanity URLs and another for supporting fetching cross project. Are those clear? Does it make sense what those are talking about? I guess those are things, but I'm not sure if they're not high priority, but I think they are important long term. So I'm wondering if I did an okay job of describing what those features mean. Let me toss them in the chat and make sure my So for clarity, if I have like one of the projects that I've worked on is that one, and so that's that project is on GitLab, and that's the one URL. But I could also configure, I could configure another server to respond to the Go GET requests to point it to. So when Go fetches a repository, it first takes fetches a module. It takes the module name and turns it into an HTTP request and tacks go get equals 1 as a query variable to the end. And whatever server responds to that is expected to respond with a meta tag that points to the actual repository. So a vanity URL is when the canonical name of a module is not where it's stored. So the canonical name, like one of the Go developers has a lot of stuff on his personal website. And so he'll have things, rsc.io/quote, or I haven't actually looked at all of them, and they're actually stored on GitHub. But he has a server that responds to requests and provides the meta tags that that tells Go where to fetch them. And that's the vanity URL pattern. So I think it would be valuable long-term to support having that in Go, or in GitLab, supporting that in GitLab. But it would be hard to have a discussion about it if I'm not clear on what that means.
From my quick guess, I would say that there is something we could do. Since GitLab pages, you can set up a custom URL. So we could reuse this custom URL part and point it to the right project. So yeah, I guess there is something we could do there.
So I'm not suggesting that GitLab implement the so there's two parts. There's one where the modules are stored, or there's the module name. So there's one server that is going to be responding to the go get queries, and then that will direct Go to another server to pull the actual source code. So what I want GitLab to do is to be able to, so right now when you send in a request, it checks that request, or checks the path, the requested module name against the project, and if the module name does not match the project, it rejects it. So I would like GitLab to be able to recognize that Vanity URL pattern and possibly on its own do a go get request to verify that the URL actually points to GitLab, and then serve it up through the proxy.
So that would be like a setting for the proxy, like you would have a setting page where you tell, okay, these are my vanity URLs and I need you to recognize them, and they are connected. This vanity URL is connected to this project and such.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most straightforward way to do it. It could theoretically be handled automatically, but I think having a configuration like that's kind of like the way Pages validates that you actually have control over a domain when you try to add a custom domain. I think that would be a good way to handle it.
We could have something similar, I guess. So definitely we can do something. That's the answer.
Yeah, Go is weird.
Don't tell that. We have Haley on the chat.
I love Go. I've been spending a lot of the last 4 or 5 years working with Go, but it is different. I've also had to learn how to explain it to people.
Yeah, I had to admit, this morning I was into the right snippet where you have a different processing if the version is 0 or 1, and if it's 2 or more, it's a totally different thing. And I was, wow, what is this? But I found out why it is so, and well, it's a strange world, I guess.
Why is that? Why are 0 and 1 treated different than 2 for version numbers?
Because that's how the Go developer decided. So it's kind of a semantic versioning thing, and I mean this is really getting into Go philosophy, but the idea is when you make backwards incompatible changes to the API of the package, to the exposed interface of functions and types, that major that you should not do that as much as possible is one of the big things. That you should, as much as almost, ideally you should never make backwards incompatible changes. When you do, it's the path changes force the developer to treat it as if it is a different package. So, if I have in the example packparse, which is a packet parsing tool, if I released a version 2 of that, then when you import it, you would put /v2 in the import path. So it is explicitly marked as this is a new version, this is a different package. And because of that philosophy, when you have a major version 2, 3, or beyond, you have to put that major version in the path, in the module name or URL. And so handling it becomes interesting. So yeah,
That's
one that works.
that's a crazy requirement.
Yeah, I understand why they did it. It's kind of a pain. And also, having mono repos in Go is useful because maintaining multiple separate packages and versioning them in parallel is difficult. I've interacted with all the fun parts of the Go versioning and tried to change tags, and then had to fight with that. So yeah.
Yeah, we will definitely send an email. You don't do that. Bam.
Yeah.
Well, cool. I think we're about ready to out of time. Anything else before we wrap?
I don't have anything.
Okay.
Thanks, Ethan. I mean, this is,
yeah.
I mean, not just this session, but I mean, your contribution in general has been, I mean, it really, I can't say anything else besides thank you. But,
Exemplary.
Yeah.
It's great. Well, thank you, everyone. And
Right.
yeah, we'll talk to you on in issues and merge requests. And yeah, Ethan, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or if I can help with anything too.
All right, we'll do.
Right. Thanks,
Okay.
everybody.
Bye.